Good evening and welcome to Crítica.NYC. My name is Raquel Batista and I'm your host for today. And I am so excited to join you at the Manhattan Neighborhood Network Studios. This is the first time that we're actually recording in the studio. As many of you know, this is actually a show that came about during the pandemic, and all of our previous shows have been through Zoom and StreamYard and online. But today we wanted to take the opportunity to come into the studio to bring you all a fresh look, some new energy as we continue into spring of 2022. And I am really excited because today we are joined by our co-host, Lucia Gomez, who is a political director for the Central Labor Council of New York. And we're also really excited because we are joined with Ana Maria Archila, who's candidate for the New York State Lieutenant Governor, together with Jumaane Williams. And so this is part 2 of our conversation on having 2 Latinas running for Lieutenant Governor in New York State. Last time we had the opportunity to speak with Diana Reina, who shared with us her campaign issues and ideas that she plans to bring. But today we are truly honored to be joined by Ana Maria Archila. So thank you so much for joining us today. And so let's just, go around, say hello, so everyone can, get to know you a little bit more.
Okay, so hi everyone, hi Raquel. I'm so happy to see you and Lucia. We have been sisters and struggled for so long. It feels so wonderful as I am launching into this journey of running for Lieutenant Governor to be reunited with movement sisters who have taught me so much about how to fight for our communities, to make sure that immigrant families, Latino communities, Black and Brown communities, working class people have the opportunity to thrive. And I decided to throw my hat, my invisible hat, in the ring for Lieutenant Governor because I feel like after being a community organizer for 20 years, I am sick and tired of seeing immigrant families excluded from the very basic things that families need to survive. After 2 years of a pandemic, when immigrant workers did some of the hardest, most dangerous jobs, risking their lives through the global pandemic, celebrated as essential, immigrant workers are being left out of the budget that Governor Hochul put forward. After we saw the pressures that families face all the time between rising rent and childcare that's too expensive and jobs that don't pay enough, the governor did not put a proposal to make sure that every family could get childcare, that we could increase wages for home care workers and childcare workers and the people who are doing the work of caring for our families. And I believe that in New York, one of the richest states in the country, one of the also most unequal states, we need to make sure that the families that suffer the most through the pandemic, the communities that suffer the most, are actually the center of the conversation and are the priority of the governing agenda. And so that's why I'm in this, to honor the courage of people who took care of one another through one of the hardest periods of our life, to honor the courage of people who fight for one another, the brilliance of the communities that raised me, and to demand that in the state of New York, Latino families, Latino young people, working class families are not just celebrated as essential and beautiful and flavorful, but actually respected with policies that allow us to have good lives.
Thank you so much for that, Ana Maria. I think that, and to give Lucia an opportunity to speak, all of us here, right, we pretty much all kind of started doing community work around the same time, like literally at the beginning of the century.
Yeah.
And here we are, right, in the 20s, right? And, we've all kind of really grown, right, within our political careers and organizing careers in talking about all of these issues that impact New Yorkers, and I think in particular New York City, and I know over the years that work has really grown to other parts of New York State as we see the Latino and the immigrant communities growing within, different communities, whether it's in Long Island or, in Hudson Valley or in other areas of the state. And so, Lucia's also like our expert when it comes to demographics and population and all of those issues. So, and she really brings that expertise and knowledge, and would love to hear a little bit, from Lucia.
I mean, 2 decades into the new century, and we finally have a Latina or a Latino period, right? A Latin person, Hispano, running for Lieutenant Governor. It's pretty amazing. It's actually also a little sad because it's taken us this long, right? The reality is that we've been talking about the lack of statewide representation, citywide representation, the lack of someone speaking to our issues and to our communities, right? Something that I heard you say, Ana Maria, and I'm just happy that you actually decided to do that, because I think, one, you've always been able to kind of harness the energy of our communities into the fight and be able to explain what it is that they sometimes cannot say for themselves, right? Some of the things that sometimes are not being listened to, which is bread and butter things like being able to care for our families, bring, work and have dignity and respect for the work that, all of our communities are doing across the board. And for me, being able to hear you say that to the entire state on diverse platforms, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity in various debates, maybe, a debate or two if we get a chance to hear it, I think is amazing. Just to be able to have those voices, at the table with, mainstream media, mainstream conversations. It's not, just amongst us, right? Or a couple of us that get together, or just sometimes being an advocate is like a bad word. And I recall growing up in the politics of the state, we're saying, oh, those are the advocates. Oh, we have a meeting with the advocates. It's like negative. And I was like, what is wrong with being a voice for your community, of being able to say, I'm okay speaking up, and I have no problems being able to dialogue using your vocabulary amongst what needs to be in the budget and what needs to be passed in state law and the things that need to be fixed in order for everyone to be whole, right? And I find that to be the incredible opportunity that we have right now to be able to hear a powerful discourse amongst all discourses and make it part of the mainstream agenda. And that's going to be great.
Yeah, I think, professional organizers, if you will, right? We've heard that term a lot over the years, get heavily criticized by more conservative groups and even people in the middle, not really understanding, right, the importance of engaging a community and having them being a part of the decision-making process. So we would love to hear a little bit about how you started, right? Because when actually I first met you, you were the executive director of the Latin American Integration Center that then merged with Make the Road by Walking, which I want to also note was mentioned several times in the Senate hearings recently with Judge Katania Brown Jackson. And so we'll get back to that later. But would love to hear, about your beginnings in doing political work.
So I began political work without understanding that it was political work. I started in a community of day laborers in the North Shore of Staten Island, teaching English in a tiny little storefront on Port Richmond Avenue. And my job, I was 21 years old, was to open the storefront in the afternoon so that day laborers, restaurant workers, childcare workers could have a place to be in community and learn English. And I started that work because I was interested, as a young immigrant myself who came from Colombia, I wanted to be in service and in community with other young immigrants. And my aunt, who was the founder of the organization that I was working for, said, well, there are lots of young immigrants here in Staten Island. You can come and help me build these organizations. And in my mind, I had imagined young people who were in school and we could do activism and arts, education together. And then what I found was young people, 15 and 16 and 17-year-old young people who had crossed the border by themselves to be able to send money home, who were working 10 and 12-hour days, renting a bed, taking turns renting a bed to have a place to sleep, getting paid $3 an hour, $4 an hour, so like really under incredibly difficult sort of exploitation and circumstances. And even with all of that, after 10 hours of work, they would come into this office at 7 o'clock at night and they would like breathe again. And they would rejoice in the opportunity to be together in community with others. And what I learned through that experience of being in that community is that even with the worst exploitation or the worst lack of safety or the worst sort of circumstances, people's desire for dignity and for freedom and people's ability to pursue their dreams is so strong. And so I learned that when we are down, our dreams are still alive, and that what we should do, what I could do, I was a young person, a young immigrant myself, but I understood very well in that moment that I had tremendous privilege in relationship to this community of folks, and that I could use my talents, my abilities, my education to support the people who were teaching me the lesson that has carried me through my life, which is that the pursuit of our own dreams is what keeps us going, and that we should do our very best to make sure that people don't have more space for their dreams and that their lives are not so occupied by the things that crush them. And so that's where I started, day laborers in Staten Island. And then I went on to build a group of a youth group of dreamers, before they were called dreamers, a youth group of undocumented young students. And from that youth group came some of the leaders that went on to create United We Dream and went on to lead the fight to change immigration laws for young people and who went on to like really change the narrative around immigration. And then I've just dedicated my entire adult life to the building of organizations where working class immigrants, communities of color, Black and brown folks, Latino folks can be powerful together, so that we can be respected vis-a-vis those people who think that we're just rebel browsers, organizers, like what are we doing? so that the things that we know are the solutions to the challenges we face, the like crushing pressures, are actually respected as real solutions. And that's the work that I've been doing. It is actually the work that should be at the center of any political conversation. Politics is not something that belongs to politicians. Politics is the way that we create the future that we want, is the way that we build a country of our dreams. And it is about people. The stories that should be written about in the newspapers is not this person versus that person, is this solution for these people. That's what we should be doing, and that's why I think this campaign is sort of exciting people, because I am sort of bringing that experience of people who are powerful together because they know we belong together, they rely on one another, and they believe in each other's brilliance, in each other's value, to have dignity. So,
I mean, recently I actually I read, I was on Twitter, right, the phenomenon. I was on Twitter and I was watching this video, this clip of a legislator, like truly rant about being bullied by activists.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I was fascinated by the kind of story he was telling to move people to feel bad for him, because he was a legislator who represents his district, right? And that the people who had gone to speak to him somehow were completely disconnected from the realities of other people who lived in his district, right? And I found it, I was a little appalled by the thought that, we're doing exactly what needs to be done to lobby and to mobilize. Perhaps we're not high-paying lobbyists, moving the pencil, picking up the calls, making a couple of phone calls, writing a couple of checks. That's not the kind of lobbying that we are actually trying to, magnify and to duplicate across the spectrum. The idea is that the only way our populations can, move is if they're engaged, is if they feel it. And I kind of love the notion that, we can see where you started, right? And where we are now. And now you're running for lieutenant governor. What do you think has actually changed? I'm just curious, like in your person, right? To do that, to run for lieutenant governor. Now you have to raise tons of money. You have to rub the elbows with the people who feel like, what needs to move is them making more calls and writing more checks, right? Like, how are you going to bring all this energy, all this engagement, ideology, and not ideology, practice, right? We've seen it, how it's transformed the state in the last 10 years. How do you duplicate that at a statewide level in a political, very specific, right, election date theme? This is different, right?
This is different. It's different, but I'll say this. Yesterday, or a few days ago, a reporter asked me, so if you're elected and you are, you're not, and, not, your running mate is not elected and someone else, Governor Hochul is elected. Let's imagine that scenario, and she gives you a $40,000 budget for your office. What can you do with that? And I was just like, the same thing I'm doing. Like, you have to remember that I have been organizing and raised by the communities who are not allowed to vote, who are paid, a fraction of the minimum wage, who are considered entirely disposable, and who understand and taught me that people can think of us as powerless, and we can actually be so powerful if we act together. And so the Lieutenant Governor's office is an office that has sort of very undescribed powers. It has been traditionally used as just a surrogate of the governor. Just someone who goes and cuts ribbons here and there, or, in this case, Brian Benjamin is being used by the governor to defend the rollback of decades of progress on criminal justice reform, instead of being used as someone who should inform and shape the policies. So we don't have a lieutenant governor's office that has been used as, even though it's elected by the people, that has been used as a representative of the people. It's just been used as a representative of the governor. And it doesn't have to be like that.
I mean,
it's an office that's elected by the people.
And in over a decade, we've seen twice where the lieutenant governor has become the governor.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So they can relegate the role to something other than, the power that it should have, because it's elected by itself, right? And that's the distinction. Like, folks can vote, they can vote for the top of the ticket, whoever they want, and they can vote for the lieutenant governor for whomever they want. I mean, it's not something that's natural for most folks. They like to go straight down the line, or whatever the case is. But this is an interesting thing. You're elected on your own.
Yes, so I think that whoever has occupied the lieutenant governor's office has accepted the paradigm that the power of that office comes from the governor. And that is not something I am accepting. The power of that office comes from the people. And so that office should be dedicated to advocating for the people and being a check on the governor when the governor is, failing to actually prioritize the things that matter to most New Yorkers.
That sounds like the public advocate.
It is a sort of public advocate
so tell
at
us
the
a
state
little
level.
bit about your running mate. You're running with Chumani Williams, who is the New York City public advocate. And, you know, I know both of you also have a long-standing relationship. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like, and, you know, why did you guys really come together?
Yeah.
Right?
So Jumani is a child of our communities, the son of Caribbean immigrants, someone who really sort of embodies the resilience of our communities, who has overcome so much himself in his own life, and started as a student activist, went on to become a tenant organizer, got elected to the city council, and really inspiring he was one of the waves of early waves of young people of color who were bringing the urgency and the dreams of our communities into City Hall, and then most recently got elected to be the public advocate. In 2018, Jumani ran for Lieutenant Governor. And with very little money, he got 47% of the vote. And
Amazing.
We all remember I remember the regret I felt about not throwing down more for the Lieutenant Governor's race in that moment. Because if we had focused just a little bit more energy,
We would have Governor
he
Jumani.
would be the governor right now.
That's amazing. It's
He
true.
would be the governor right now.
Yeah.
Because Andrew Cuomo was going down. Eventually, he just had, bullied enough people that eventually, but it wasn't just because of the people he bullied, it was because of the courage of women who actually spoke up about his abuses that he finally went down. But yeah, Jumani would have been the governor today. So we don't want to make the same mistake. I joined Jumani because he is someone that embodies the kind of politics that are rooted in our people's dreams and in our people's struggles. Because he's someone who is uniquely able to talk about the intersections of the lack of affordable housing and the lack of affordable childcare and jobs that don't pay enough and the over-policing and over-incarceration of our communities. He's able to, through his own life, really talk about the incredible efforts that our mothers make to keep us safe, the incredible efforts that our elders make to help us make progress generation after generation, and the importance of not just being comfortable in that, but actually doing what we can in our lifetime to make sure that our children, your daughter, my kids, have the certainty that their world is better because of us. And so that's Jumani. I would not have done it with anyone else. I did it at the request of the Working Families Party and because I really wanted to join Jumani in this journey. And this is the first time that we have a ticket of two people of color running together to represent the state. And it is not a coincidence, I think, that women are the ones that are challenging Brian Benjamin, because he is staying quiet, actually, on the issues that matter. My main critique of Brian Benjamin, the current Lieutenant Governor, is that he has been totally missing and silent when the governor allowed the eviction moratorium to expire and in the middle of the Omicron wave, when the governor left out immigrant workers from the budget, even though she celebrates our families as essential, our workers as courageous, but left us out. When the governor failed to put anything meaningful, any investment in climate, even though we saw the trains flooding and people drowning in their basement apartments.
Yes.
And so the governor is putting but her first budget is a budget of small solutions to big problems. That's really how we can characterize her budget. And her lieutenant governor is saying nothing. And actually he's lending his face and his voice to efforts to roll back bail reform, to roll back the victories, the very hard-fought victories to protect children from being sent to jail, to make sure that people who are accused of crimes have access to the evidence against them, very important civil rights gains. And so I think we can't have people who come from our communities and get close to power and then do nothing. That serves nobody. We need to have people who are like going to do something.
That's been the toughest thing, right? Because that's tough, right? You know, maintaining even people that have been supported by communities, that come from communities, change along the way, right? And sometimes they're not as accountable as we would like them to be. But, you know, just to get back a little bit more to your own story and, you know, all the things that you've done around accountability, right? So then you were with Make the Road, now you were with the Center of Popular Democracy, and you did big things a few years ago. You know, right now, many of us have been watching the confirmation process for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. You were very involved during the Kavanaugh hearings. You know, tell us a little bit about that, because that was huge. I mean, really, that's what got your national profile up, quite frankly. So if people don't know you from anywhere, they know where you showed up.
So I'll give you the long story since we have time. So after building Make the Road New York, an organization that's really about making sure that immigrant communities are respected and valued and powerful so that we can have better lives, all of us, I went on to create the Center for Popular Democracy, a network of community organizations. And when Donald Trump became president, we understood. Remember that happened.
I never thought that would happen. Did you think that was really going to happen?
I cried.
No.
I cried. I remember.
Horrible. It shows that like we have to pay attention to the elections every single time. So Donald Trump becomes president. We understood that he was dead serious about his agenda, that he was going to roll back decades of progress on women's rights, on workers' rights, on civil rights. He was going to scapegoat voting rights. He was going to scapegoat and harm and attack immigrant communities. We took him at his word. And we also understood that he was not a regular politician, that we couldn't just negotiate with him and lobby our way to safety, that we had to interrupt business as usual. So my organization helped train thousands of people across the country to really interrupt the business of Congress by inserting their stories, by going to town halls to talk about the importance of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, by going to Congress when the Republicans were trying to roll back the ACA and showing up in their wheelchairs and showing up with their stories about the urgent need for healthcare and really disrupting the corrupt process that was taking place to just like take people's healthcare away just because that's just the politics of the day. So we used the act of disruption to really like slow down the Trump agenda, but also make sure that the debate was focused on the people who were going to be impacted, to insert the voices of people. So we did that in 2017 around healthcare. We did that when the tax bill, the like GOP tax scam that gave billions of dollars back to millionaires was being discussed. And we did that to try to protect DACA, the Deferred Action for Children, for Dreamers. And then when Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, we understood really well that that meant we would lose our rights to healthcare, to reproductive choice, to the progress we had made on LGBTQ equality, and so much more. So we began to mobilize the same troops to try to insert the stories of people. And in that environment came something we didn't know, which was Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony of the sexual assault that she endured at the hands of Brett Kavanaugh when she was a teenager and when he was a teenager. So we sort of paused, and something really powerful began to happen, which is that the same people who were there to talk about healthcare began to tell their own stories of sexual assault. And across the country,
like goosebumps.
yeah,
For that.
and across the country, women and people of all genders actually began to talk about their stories of sexual violence and sexual assault. And it was just like a beautiful sort of lifting of the veil of a reality that is there all the time. But we, because it's not being spoken about, we sort of act like it's not there, but it was there. So it was a putting of the mirror to the country, like, look at who we are. We are a country where there's an epidemic of sexual violence, and we have someone in the Supreme Court who is accused of sexual assault, who might be empowered to decide over all of our lives. So in that context, with me being one of the organizers of the protest, I was forced to ask myself a question that I had tried myself not to answer, which was whether I was willing to add my own story to this. And I had successfully hidden sort of my experience of sexual assault for 30 years. I had just stuffed it in the back of my closet and left it there, like not looked at it. And in a moment of just being surrounded by courageous people, I shared my story, which happened to be in front of Senator Flake's office, the then senator from Arizona, and sort of added my story to these beautiful fabric of stories of people. And then a few days later, Senator Flake was walking to the Judiciary Committee hearing after he had announced that he would vote for Kavanaugh to be nominated to the Supreme Court, after the country heard Dr. Ford's testimony in detail. And I just intercepted him as he was trying to run to an elevator and asked him a question, which is like, what are you doing, sir? How are you justifying the decision to empower someone who is accused of sexual assault to the Supreme Court? Think about the children that are growing up in this moment, and think about what justice is. And justice requires actually assuming responsibility for the harms you cause. That's step number one. Step number two is trying to repair. But if we have someone, Brett Kavanaugh, who is stuck at step one, he cannot...
Who likes beer.
He staged a really powerful defense of like, I like beer. What is wrong with that? Instead of actually heeding the invitation that was made to him to model how to be accountable, how to say, I have done wrong, and this is what I have done in my life to do right. He was stuck at step one. He could not admit the harm he had caused. And so it was a moment that, could not have been planned. It happened to be in a really crucial moment. The cameras of CNN happened to be there. And so these sort of confrontation of urgent demand to look at me and tell me that my life doesn't matter, that what happened to me doesn't matter, then hit the screens and really, I think it tapped into the nerve of that was, I think, being felt across the country of, really like a lot of distress at watching our elected officials reaffirm a culture that enables sexual violence by not, holding men who cause harm accountable for the harm they cause.
And this is not like your first time. I mean, I'm just saying, like, that might have been caught on camera, right? But, what can you tell all those individuals at home, right, that are watching, that they can stand up? Look at what happens when, I remember during the pandemic, the Karen surged, right? That person who like complains, right? I want to speak to your manager. I want to say something, right? I get it all the time at home. Like I'm the Latina Karen. Like my daughter's like, Mom. I go, no, I paid for this and I need for them to give me what I asked for. Like, or why are you making me stand online? You should have more staff, but you don't have more staff because you're cutting people's hours and you're doing, right? So like, you know, this is not your first time. What do you tell people who like need to stand up and be able to say something? They think elected officials are not human beings who are continuously debating in their heads and on the floor and vocally decisions that will impact millions of people.
Yeah. I want people to, the one thing that I wanted people to get from that image of the confrontation with Senator Flake, you know, after it happened and I was reflecting on it, was that democracy doesn't exist without us. That through our actions, through our urgent demands to listen to my story, to our organizing, through our marches and our protests, we keep democracy alive. And democracy is essential because that's how we take care of one another. I cannot myself construct schools and bridges and tunnels and roads. Like, we actually need democracy to work in order for us to have like the basic infrastructure in our lives. But also we need it to work so that my children and my children's children will have a future. And so this is how we take care of one another, the generations that will come after us that we may never meet. So, but democracy is not something that politicians do. It's something that people bring alive every day. And so if there's one thing I want people to know is like, if you feel like you have something to say, that is like your first invitation. Listen to the voice in your head. Listen to the voice inside you that's saying, I must do something when I see injustice, when I feel like things are going the wrong way. And then surround yourself with other people who are doing the same, because courage is contagious. It's this beautiful thing that, like, really you see someone doing something courageous and you feel like something is bubbling inside you and you must join them. That's what happened to me. Like, that's actually what happened to me. I was surrounded by people who were being so courageous, and I was like, oh my God, okay, blah.
And it's happening again to you now.
And it's happening again now. Yes.
Now you're doing the run. Yes. So, you know, how do you feel about now going from that to becoming a candidate, right? Like, now you're a candidate that's very, it's the same, but it's different.
It is different.
Right? Yeah. And then potentially, you know, being elected. You know, what do you think about that?
I think a couple of things. It's only been a couple of weeks. And in these couple of weeks, I've learned so much. People have been so generous with their knowledge, with their ideas, with their thoughts about what could be different. You know, because we have to petition our way into the ballot, I am talking to lots of people to ask them to sign a paper to get my name on the ballot. And when I ask them what they care about, they reaffirm again and again why it is important for us to do this campaign, which is that people need housing to be more affordable. People need to make sure that they're not going to be kicked out of their apartments arbitrarily, that their rents are not going to be raised, you know, in ways that clearly are forcing them to leave their homes. People want to make sure that their kids are safe, and so that they have youth programs, that they have childcare. People want the things that we understand to be the basic, most stabilizing conditions so that we can recover. And I'm learning a lot. I'm sort of being reminded a lot of the brilliance of people who actually are experts at their lives, who understand very well what the solutions need to be. And so that's sort of the same from being an organizer. People are brilliant, and when you invite them to think about the solutions, they have an idea. And the thing that I'm also learning is that elected officials often are trying their best, that they are, you know, sort of facing pressures to be obedient And the best elected officials listen to the voice inside that says, I must do what I can and take risks and take, be willing to endure the anger of my colleagues or the anger of the governor or the disappointment of some person in order to actually advance what they know are the solutions that would help their community. So I'm sort of, now that I'm talking to elected officials more in these role as candidate, I'm sort of more in touch with these internal sort of turmoil that they have all the time about being effective, which requires being able to work in the power structures that exist, and also being courageous in the face of the power structures that exist. And I believe that a lot of elected officials are genuine, like, public servants, and that so that's I think it's important to say this, because I don't think that a narrative that sort of where, like, politicians are just, like, out to sell our communities, like, it's not. It is sometimes true. But it's not actually, like, it doesn't give me hope in the system. And I need us. I think we need to believe that government can work for us, and that's why we must demand of it to work for us. I'm also really, like, much more in touch with the realities of the very corrupting effect of big money, of dark money in our politics. I'll give you an example. So the Lieutenant Governor, Brian Benjamin, just attended at the end of February a fundraiser organized by real estate executives, including people like Stephen Ross, who, was a Trump donor. And these people have a PAC, a political action committee, that they are using to advance a narrative of law and order, right? And so Brian Benjamin goes there, and he's rubbing shoulders with these real estate executives and, like, hanging out because he's trying to get their money. And then a few days later, Brian Benjamin and the governor are putting out, leaking to the press, a proposal to roll back changes to the law that really helped New York step out from the dark ages where it was when we were putting kids in jail and trying them as adults, when prosecutors were allowed to hide evidence from the people they charged, where we were, charging bail and really criminalizing poverty. So Brian Benjamin is with these real estate people trying to get their money. Their agenda of, like, law and order is really just a real estate agenda. It's an agenda to protect the interest of real estate,
their properties,
instead of an agenda to protect the public safety. And then what happens? Brian Benjamin and Hochul then do the bidding and try to sell it to our communities as public safety. So that just shows you the corrupting sort of effects of a political system that is in which candidates get a lot of money from mostly corporations and millionaires and the richest few. And so I sort of want to make sure that our campaign is different.
So how do you propose then to address the issues of public safety? Because that's definitely been a big topic, especially since the onset of the pandemic, and will be a huge topic during this campaign season.
And the narrative that's being sold is very divisive. I mean, if you're not with police officers, essentially law and order, cracking down, then you're a far lefty and somehow out of touch with reality, and you're probably moved here from Kansas or Kentucky, and you're happy-go-lucky in New York City. You don't care about working people and our communities, essentially, black and brown. We're sold this narrative like you cannot have, safety in a space that feels safe, not just safety.
And also, I just want to add to this the idea of that a lot of people in our communities and Latino and immigrant communities tend to be socially conservative as well. So you know, when you're looking at an issue like this, how do you bridge that gap? How are you going to reach that voter to come out?
So first, everybody deserves to be safe and to feel safe. That is, and government has to be focused on people feeling safe and being safe. The safest communities are well-resourced communities. Communities where people have housing, where people have childcare, where kids have good schools and good after-school programs, where people have good jobs, where the resources are oriented to keep people alive and to keep people whole, where people have access to mental health services, and where people are actually sort of allowed to breathe and not be tense and stressed out all the time. And the pandemic was a huge disruption to everyone. I mean, raise your hand if the pandemic did not disrupt your life.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if the pandemic did not impact your mental health. Everybody is suffering some level of stress and trauma from the last few years. And the people who were hanging out, holding on to dear life, to the basic stability that they had, lost it and are in full-blown crisis right now. So in order to, I think a lot of the rise in violence and actually a lot of the rise in antisocial behavior, like the behavior we see of people in airplanes freaking out about wearing a mask, is actually evidence of profound social stress. And we need to do things that help people stabilize. We cannot ask someone who is looking for a place to sleep every single night, who is trying to figure out if they will be able to eat something, to be sane, because their life is insane. We cannot ask a mom who is working 3 jobs and who is trying to get her 9-year-old to take care of the 2-year-old and someone to take care of the grandmother to be sane. Her life is insane. And so we need to recognize that in order to lower the volume on violence, which is an expression of social stress, we need to lower the volume on the things that are crushing people. And we need to invest, so that's sort of a long-term thing. But a short-term thing is violence is not lowered with more violence. So we cannot throw police officers at homeless people and ask them to resolve the housing crisis or the mental health crisis. It's not fair to police officers to ask that of their jobs. That's not their job. So we need to address mental health by expanding services for mental health. We need to address homelessness and housing security by actually addressing housing affordability. And we need to address violence with initiatives that interrupt violence. I come from Colombia, a country that has been at war or was at war for the entire time that I lived there. I grew up in Bogota at a time when Bogota was the most dangerous city in the world. So I know what it feels like to be in a place that is profoundly unsafe. And Bogota is no longer one of the most dangerous cities in the world. And that wasn't achieved by throwing more police officers at people in the street or throwing more people in jails. It was achieved through initiatives that actually engaged communities that were both the victims of violence and sometimes the ones who participated in the violence, and actually engaging people in the solutions. So I think that we need to have programs like violence interruption programs to address the violence in neighborhoods. We need to have programs that take guns off of our streets. Let us remember that Governor Hochul, when she was in her previous roles, really worked very hard to get a high rating from the NRA. So she is not someone who has helped take guns off of our streets. She's actually the opposite. So we need to have a debate that it's about the facts and that actually invites the solutions that work. Everybody deserves to be safe. I want the mother who's working 3 jobs to be safe. So we need to control the skyrocketing rise in rents. I want her children to be safe, so we need to have childcare in all the communities all across the state. I want young people to be safe, so we need to make sure that they have good parks, safe streets, that they're not sandwiched between gun violence and over-policing, that they have opportunities, that they have the time to hang out and not be criminalized when they're at the park. How about that? So that's the New York that I imagine. It is entirely possible if we focus on the solutions that help people be whole.
Well, thank you so much for that. So we have a few minutes left, and I'd like, kind of for each of us, just like 2 minutes, your thoughts, reflections, next steps. What are we seeing?
I mean, I know that we can't continue to go down the path we're in, right? Where we're having this narrative of fear that's being cultivated in our households. That people don't want to, get on the subway, that people don't want, to walk out at a certain time at night. I mean, reality is that, folks need to, in order to feel free, we need to make sure that there are certain safeguards in place so that they, on their way to work aren't being, harassed, Things happened before the pandemic. So this is not new, just post-pandemic, right? We already had major amounts of homelessness during the de Blasio administration, during Cuomo, right? Like homelessness and children in our schools that were homeless before the pandemic was at an all-time high. So, it's not something that is it's exasperated post-pandemic. I think we really, for all of our activists that are out there and all of our leaders, right, that are listening to this narrative, you got to bring it in, right, and understand that this is about our communities being able to move forward, and we're not going to move forward if we accept that the only way to get out of this, bad situation that we're in right now is to add more bad things that have not worked, things that we've cycled out because they were bad for our communities. Rockefeller drug laws were bad for our communities. They created decades of criminalizations of all of our neighborhoods. Like, let's stop for a moment, because I know that we're on this all-time high about solving and getting back and ensuring that people feel safe on our streets. But let's be real about this. Like, for decades, we've been criminalized and we've been socialized to believe that the only way to be able to feel safe is more police officers on our streets. I know that my mother feels safe if there's a cop car going around the block, right? If there's multiple, but that's the older generation that has been socialized into believing that. But we cannot have this, the elderly, feel safer with police officers. The middle class, those that have opportunities, want to protect what they have and hold on to it, and therefore they feel safer with police. I think we need to really have a deep understanding of what solutions, and I'm hoping that you'll have that opportunity to share some of that on the stage of the debates.
So we have a few more minutes if you want to give some last words before we wrap up.
I just want to say that I feel so honored by the trust that people are placing in me to try to tell our stories, to try to remind everyone that we deserve everything, not just the little crumbs that fall off the table here and there. We deserve full safety, full opportunity, to live dignified lives. And I am hoping that through this campaign, I do my very best to celebrate the courage of people, the dreams of people, and to remind us that we can change New York to be one where the priorities of working class families, of communities of color are at the center. And I feel really honored to also reconnect with people who taught me so many things, like the two of you. It's really quite wonderful.
Well, Ana Maria, thank you again so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk to us today. I want to thank Lucia for joining us here today. And I just want to, let our viewers at home know We will make sure to post information on being able to find more information on Ana Maria and her campaign and getting to learn more about the work and her candidacy to Lieutenant Governor. And again, you know, we just want to thank all of you for your continued support, your continued viewership of Crítica.NYC. I want to thank the Manhattan Neighborhood Network for all that they do to support this show and getting us on air to talk about the issues that impact Latinos in New York City, throughout New York State and beyond. I want to thank our executive producers, Zenaida Mendez, Freddy Pinto, and Carla Robles for all of the work that they do to make this show happen. And, you know, this is a very important moment in time for our communities. We are recovering from the pandemic. We're still not out of the pandemic. We are still very much in it. But things, you know, are hopefully improving. This election, like all elections, are very important, and really our goal here at Crítica.NYC is to get you the information so that you can make an educated and informed decision as to who you would like to see in leadership. Latinos communities suffer from, you know, the highest levels of poverty, of health issues, being able to get our children the best of education. So we really need leaders that listen to us and understand our issues to be able to represent us even at the highest levels as governor and lieutenant governor. So again, you know, I'd like to thank all of you, and I think that we have completed our first show in studio at the Manhattan Neighborhood Network for Crítica.NYC. So
and
again,
thank
you.
The primaries are June 28th.
So
right?
give us those
Yes.
dates, Lucia.
Right, so primaries June 28th, the Democratic and Republican primary, because there will be a Republican primary. So for anyone who's registered in a party, right, and everyone who's not registered in a party, there are elections next year too, by the way, you know,
Yeah.
and in New York City, primaries are what decide essentially the candidates that get elected in the November election. But then we have the November election, right? But I think first off, right, Ana Maria and other candidates that are running have to figure out the right narrative to engage our communities to come out and vote. It's not, you know, it's a heavy duty election year because we're going to see congressional races and potentially the politics of the country change in the next couple of, you know, months.
So if people want to know more about our campaign, you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram, Ana Maria for NY with the FOR-NY, and AnaMariaForNY.com. And I am so excited to celebrate our people.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye.